Hello, everyone. Welcome to uh, All About Ibogaine, which is a Thursday meeting that I started right after Trump's executive order because I realized that a lot of people would be looking for Ibogaine. It would become a household word. And a lot of people would put up their shingle as being Ibogaine experts. And I really felt that the people who are looking for this treatment need to understand what it is, how powerful a medicine it is, and how to um, how to understand how to approach it, what it takes for a successful treatment. And so we started the series of podcasts talking to people who have been working with Ibogaine for a really long time. Awake.net is a social network and business hub for the entheogenic community, and where you can go there and you can create a blog for yourself, or you can create a course, or you can participate in the social network. Um, and we're slowly building an archive of knowledge and a living library of mentors and masters. So if you're one of those people, a mentor or master, please join Awake. If you're a psychonaut or someone just learning about psychedelics, interested in knowing more and learning from people who have been working with these medicines for a really long time, then awake.net is a place for you. So for today's podcast, I'm really excited to welcome Garyth Moxey. I'm just going to spotlight you. Hi, Garyth. It's so nice to see you. Um,
Hi, Lakshmi. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So Garyth has been working with Ibogaine for over 15 years and has treated over 1,000 people. And so he has this lived experience of working with Ibogaine. Now, for those of you who are seeing what's happening right now with the resurgence of interest in Ibogaine, that just happened with this AFI and the executive order. But before that, working with Ibogaine was just a small bunch of people who were um, who had to learn from each other and learn from experience because there is no regulation around it. So, so the kind of experience Garyth brings is so invaluable. Um, so, Garyth, could you just tell us a little bit about how your origin story about how you came to Ibogaine and then, how it has progressed to what you're doing now?
Okay, yeah, sure. Again, thanks for having me, and hello to everybody that might be listening. Um, how did I get into this? So first of all, I need to say we run Inner Realms. I'm always the front person for Inner Realms, but Blair Bromley is my partner. She's been with me. We've been operating Inner Realms for, I think we're in year 11 now. And she's the cohesive glue that holds this shit together. Without her, it wouldn't be possible. I'm always the one that gets the attention and not her. So big props to Blair. How did I get into this work? Well, I come into working with Ibogaine through addiction. When did addiction start? As early as I can remember, really. I lived in my parents had moved to Canada, emigrated to Canada in the early 60s, and barely out of barely into adulthood themselves. And they promptly got divorced, I think, when I was around about two or something. And so and I lived in Canada until I was 8. I feel that addiction started or addictive tendencies started at a very young age. You know, when I cast my mind back, I remember as a kid, if my mum wasn't around, then I would eat honeycomb cereal until the roof of my mouth was raw. You know, from that the type of cereal, and so already I was suffering consequences for my compulsive self-soothing, if you will. Or another one was apples. If I'd get home from school and there would often be a big bag of Macintosh apples in the refrigerator, and I'd tear into those and maybe two or three or even four sometimes. And until my stomach was hurting and stuff. So that kind of behavior started at a very young age. And then moving to the UK, I started smoking cigarettes with the cool kids behind the bike shed. But that's in primary school. So I remember me and my buddy Ralph, we started smoking at like 9 or 10. And we used to be able to get cigarettes out of a machine in the street back then, and also with like pocket money, the packs of 10. And then drinking started at a very young age as well. I remember I had an old army flask, and I would fill that up with bits of this and bits of that from the drinks cabinet so it wasn't obvious, and create this horrible concoction of alcohol with all kinds of shit in it, like Cinzano and gin and stuff like that. And then would go off and drink on my own. This is like 10, 11 years old or something. So that whole kind of behavior started at a young age. And coming from the UK, alcohol is almost like a cultural obligation. And
Mhm.
and one side of my family didn't drink, and the other side did. And so going to family events, Christmas and stuff like that, I learned at a young age that, that's kind of what adults did, you know. So that kind of progressed into, after 16, I started getting into drugs. By 19, I was an IV drug user, which which was in some ways an attempt to get away from the alcohol. I was going from one thing to the other, anything that was kind of less harmful, if you will. But then that always led to more harm. And so I went from opiates to amphetamines. I have ADHD, so I was drawn into amphetamine use at a young age, biker speed and stuff. And I ended up becoming an IV user pretty heavily for a few years. Um, and also found opiates. Opiates were something, again, if I was doing opiates and I wasn't drinking. If I was doing amphetamines, I wasn't drinking. But if I wasn't doing other drugs, I'd always find my way back to alcohol, which is something that was kind of socially acceptable and stuff. And
Legal drug,
yeah,
right?
and especially in the UK, it's just like normal, and I think a lot of us really started drinking heavily at a young age, more so it was more easily accessible in the 70s and early 80s than it probably is now. So when I look at my grandson, and I think, especially when he was younger, I was looking at him at a young age and thinking, holy shit, he's a kid and I was drinking and smoking when so yeah. So it all started at a young age, and yeah, I all of the consequences that come with all of that
I
started
thought it
catching
was
up with me.
interesting what you said, Gareth, about how you were compulsive and a compulsive eater, etc. And it
Mm,
makes me think that that addictive. A lot of people have that. Uh, Almost everybody has some sort of compulsive thing that they do that's addictive. It doesn't always become opiates or something dangerous, but this addictive, compulsive kind of.
yeah,
I've
yeah.
done it too with food.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I was neurodivergent and had school and everything, ADHD, which I didn't really realize I had that until I was 35. Somebody in an AA meeting pulled me aside and said, after listening to my story, was like, you should probably look into attention deficit disorder, and then I got on the computer and then like, holy shit, that explains a lot. But I think a lot of neurodivergent people get pulled into substance use. A lot of the people that we work with identify as having or been diagnosed as having ADHD, which is kind of an unsettled nervous system anyhow. So, I bit my nails and everything as a kid. And so I had an unsettled nervous system anyways. And then we're just kind of self-medicating, looking for ways in order to calm that down, you know. So, and then the brain, if it finds something that is suddenly calming, or things become easier with a little bit of this, retreating into this or to that, then the brain will want to hop onto that, because it's what it's learned.
Yeah, can you talk about how Ibogaine does a different kind of calming down of the nervous system?
Well, I mean, that's more of a process I feel that people go through with some rewiring and stuff. So, that's, and again, that's a temporary thing, like the addiction interruption. Where after I did my first flood dose, I had no symptoms of attention deficit disorder at all for about 90 days. I felt like I was on a stimulant without being on a stimulant. I had that kind of focus and calmed nervous system, because that's also what stimulants do for me as well. So that's the powerful addiction interruption, and that often calms people's nervous systems. But again, it's not a cure or anything like that. However, it can change the way our brains are working. And then if we can work to try and keep hold of some of that, then, but I wasn't cured of attention deficit or anything like that by taking Ibogaine and, taking boosters
That
all
was
the time
when,
would
how
would
old
be
were you
different.
when you took Ibogaine?
I was 45.
Okay.
Is that right? 45? Yes, 45. Yeah. I got into working with Ibogaine because I spent many years in Alcoholics Anonymous, a little bit of Narcotics Anonymous, and that was a repetitive cycle that I would get into. I probably really wasn't working the steps very well, but it was something that I'd found that a kind of refuge with people that understood what was going on. Before that, the only people that I kind of connected with were other drug users, and that's where people often find themselves. And then when I was younger as well, I spent many years in the festival community, which actually kind of saved me from a world of heavy drug use and incarceration. Um, so it's in Britain. There was in the free festival scene, so to speak. Stonehenge was the big festival that happened every year, and there was a circuit that people would go on, and people lived like a little bit like deadheads in living in buses and trucks and stuff. And Britain has always had a strong traveler community, whether that be Romani gypsies or different variations, different groups that were traveling groups that lived on the road. So this was just like another traveling group that formed, and so I got into a lot of psychedelics through being in that community, and that kind of really did save me from a lot of heavy drug use and it gave me a little bit of purpose, I suppose. But again, you're finding yourself with the misfits.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And we were just drawn to each other in certain ways, and
I was
because
just
all of
trying,
those people, they're not they don't fit in either, like round pegs in a square hole or something, so you kind of find your people. And then after that, of course, finding my people was within Alcoholics Anonymous,
well,
because that's
you've gone through quite a transformation. Just looking at where you are now and what you do now,
uh,
you as a human
yes.
being have gone through quite a transformation.
Yeah, sure. And if I had to go back and do it all again, it would probably be done the same manner. And as difficult as it was living in addiction when I was younger, because burning bridges, ruining relationships, romantic relationships that wouldn't last, or many of those relationships were also with like all of my girlfriends came from broken homes, so you're kind of drawn to something that reflects you, but that's not necessarily the healthiest way to go about things. So, but yeah, that's how I kind of found myself in Alcoholics Anonymous, and recovery. But eventually, I broke free of alcohol and hard drugs, and the hard drugs come back around every time I would drink anyhow, because all judgment goes out the window and everything's on the table, and seems like a good idea at the time if I'm drinking. So yeah, it became too much, because with alcohol it just gets progressively worse and worse, or it did with me, to the point of delirium tremens and stuff. And yeah, so at 35, I was really desperate. And I remember being at somebody's place, because I was living in Marin County then in Northern California. And I hadn't had a relapse, but I could feel one coming just around the corner. I'd get to that 6 month mark, and then I'd drink again, throw my life down the toilet, and then go crawling back to AA 6 months later. And people were like, "Oh, well, yeah, welcome back. We've been waiting for you." Took a little bit longer this time. So I was at somebody's house, and an LSD deal was happening in front of me, and I was like, can I get some of that? So I bought some LSD, knowing about what was going on what had gone on in Saskatchewan in the 1950s at Weyburn Hospital, where they were treating people with LSD, or treating people with alcohol use disorder with LSD, with astounding results. So, and I had taken buttloads of LSD before, in the traveling community and festival community, and often whilst drinking at the same time. But it was really the intention that was behind that LSD experience, and it was a pretty heavy one. It was a few hundred mics, I seem to remember. But within about 4 hours of that experience, I knew that my relationship with alcohol was overdone, which was pretty profound, really.
Miraculous.
And a lot had happened for me to get to that point. I lost a marriage and many relationships before that. I used to live in the Philippines, and had a pretty good life working as a diving instructor. But yeah, it was so there was a lot on the line, so to speak, at 35, and I was afraid that I'd either kill myself or somebody else with the drinking. And so, yeah, I took the LSD, and that kind of set me off on a completely new path. And that's when I got on the computer and was looking at psychedelic recovery, and that's when Ibogaine came up.
Yeah.
And so I'd known about it from that. I'd known about it from a very young age. I bought Plants of the Gods. It's a book by Albert Hoffman, and Iboga was in there. But later editions actually talk about Ibogaine and addiction breaking. But so that's when I first heard about it. And I wasn't about to start giving LSD to people with alcohol use disorder, but I have done a little bit of that when people couldn't take Ibogaine for whatever reasons, So, but that's kind of what set me off on the path of wanting to work with Ibogaine. And so that was a long time ago. That was more than 24 years ago or something. And I had a friend I was actually going to ask to be my sponsor. It was Rocky Caravelli, and he'd had a relapse on heroin and methamphetamine. And we had a mutual friend, and he told me about what was going on with Rocky. And I was like, Rocky needs to go do Ibogaine. And he was like, what's that? And so I explained what Ibogaine was, and Rocky went off to take Ibogaine in northern Baja, and that was a long time ago. And back then there were very few clinics at all, and so and I learned, tracked what was going on with him and his treatment, and so and it had been successful for him. So afterwards, I was like, yeah, I'm going to go to Canada and open an Ibogaine clinic. And that was about 24 years ago or something, and I met my ex-wife at a Burning Man party. It all got put on the back burner for a while, and but
Burning Man will do that.
yeah. So but that's kind of how and that was my intention. That's really what I wanted to do. I just had a lot of other life stuff that was happening and what have you.
So your
So
intention was when you said your intention was heavy, before you did the LSD, was that the intention to heal? That was really that you were seeing?
Yes, yeah, to heal myself of this affliction, you know.
And
So
isn't that really important for a person who's doing ibogaine or wants to heal themselves to really form a strong, like have that strong drive?
yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I explain to people, if people come into treatment, it's got to be the most important thing to them at this time, particularly people in addiction. But, it's not just like, oh, I'm going to go do the thing, I mean, and do no preparation or anything. And, you know, sometimes we get, parents calling us, and I'm like, well, it's all very well speaking to you, and I'll give you a little bit of information, but it's the person that's coming to do the ibogaine that I really need to speak to, and are they ready? So yeah.
So I think this is one of those 10 questions that you should ask yourself is, are you ready? Are you ready for ibogaine? Can you speak to that a little bit? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, and sometimes generally speaking, we don't like to work with younger people. I can speak for myself. When I was a young adult, I knew fucking everything. There was not really much I didn't know, and so and yeah, so people have to be in that place of being ready to do the deep work. And sometimes I've treated people more than once, and if they've gone back out and relapse, it's kind of like they weren't ready. They weren't quite ready. They didn't quite know what they were stepping into. Maybe they weren't ready to leave that behind. That lifestyle, that whole thing, and then people build identities around that kind of thing. I know I did when I was in active addiction. We kind of like risque kind of drug
Yeah,
use. Yeah,
exactly. Like
yeah.
the dance with
I mean,
death
there's a
thing.
character that builds around that, and by the time people get into their 30s, that gets really old, and there's a certain amount of stunting, I think, that goes on with, with maturity and stuff. So, but again, yeah, like people have to be ready and also ready to confront parts of themselves that they might not want to look at, which is, part of the healing process anyhow. And being totally open to what the medicine might have to show us. So, but yeah, intention is everything. When people are coming into to doing this kind of work. So yeah, did that answer that?
Yeah, yeah, I did. And I just want to, it seems like even if somebody is not completely focused and does it and fails, there has been some benefit in that process of ibogaine for them, right?
Yeah, yeah, sure. And I don't know about fail. What it depends on the objective. If the objective was to, like, just stop using a certain drug and they go back to it, well then. But I don't. I think that there's something that we get from something anyhow. I'd gone to traditional rehab. I didn't stay sober very long after coming out from there. Would I see that as a failure? Yes, probably at the time. But now I'm a bit older. Reflecting on all of that, no, that was also part of my journey. So it wasn't a failure, so to speak. So even if people, return to drug use, well, Rome wasn't built in a day,
Right.
and we come from a society that wants things instantly, which is especially when we get into that instant thing is we want to change our consciousness or that uncomfortableness, and so we get used to wanting instant gratification, and addiction isn't really like that. Addiction's a journey, and it's not that sometimes people get to drop everything and just walk away from addiction, but it's actually a long healing process, and we're all works in progress, and I think we're that goes up until the time that we draw our last breath you know, that we're somewhat evolving. So I think that there's a certain amount of personal evolution when we come to Ibogaine anyhow. That we might have learned some stuff about ourselves, or what we might learn what isn't going to work, you know,
Right.
if
Yeah,
we
so
find ourselves
there's
back
value
into
in
those
that.
kind of behaviors. So I think there's always something that comes out of it, and this kind of idea that we kind of fail at something isn't. It's not. That's not really consistent with the whole thing. Hang on, I just got something. Can you hear that?
No,
Oh,
what?
okay, good. That's right. It's some noisy background stuff. I just didn't know if it was
Um,
coming over the top. So
well, somebody has a question.
yes,
Can Garrett speak briefly why they had to move to Mexico from Canada? And can you provide your insight? You can see into Canada's regulatory trajectory. Do you mind if we hold this question, Jan, for a little bit? Just
yeah,
so we can, we'll open it up for questions in a second.
yeah,
Um, is that okay with you, Garrett?
yeah, yeah. Sure, absolutely. Hi,
Oh,
Jen.
okay, thanks. Um, Um, so you were talking about the intention, but the second thing to look at, I think, is the pre-screening process, right? You have a
Yeah,
pretty intense pre-screening process, and can you
yeah.
talk a little bit about that and why you have that process in place, and what it achieves?
Yeah. Well, that often st we'll start with a phone call. People either are cold calling because they've got they've got our number from the internet or a referral or something or other. So um, that's when the container kind of starts really, or we get an application come through. Some people fill out applications right away, and then that gives us a broad outline of somebody. Um, but we often have to dig a little deeper. And people always put their best foot forward. Just naturally, we have a tendency to do that. But then there's a certain amount of uncovering that we do in phone calls, you know. And so that screening process isn't just about the phone call. There's certain things that get set up around that as well. Like, I might have some more calls set at a certain time, or we're supposed to get some blood work and liver function, all of this EKGs done at a certain time. And if people are missing calls or like I was saying, this has to be the most important thing to people if they're going to come and do this. It's not something that they want to squeeze in between, oh, I'm going on vacation now and then I got this and I can squeeze in this Ibogaine treatment. It shouldn't really be treated like that. So that's also part of the screening is, I'm intuitively picking up on stuff. And ultimately, a lot gets uncovered when we first start working with medicine, but we can get a good outline of somebody, and we can learn a lot about somebody through that kind of screening process, you know,
So
with
with
the
addiction,
application.
like with addictions, especially people addicted to more than one thing,
Yeah.
there's these contraindications and
Mhm.
organ
Yeah.
function stuff. So there's a lot of medical things.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm bringing this up and going on about it is because when I first got into Ibogaine, learning about Ibogaine, and I started this program, there was a woman who went to a clinic in Tijuana, and she called me at 9 p.m. at night because the clinic had kicked her out into the streets of Tijuana because she tried to smuggle pot in. And she was like, so I went and picked her up. I lived in San Diego at the time, and I went to see the guy, and he was kind of high. You could tell he was high, on something. So what has often happened in this underground Ibogaine community, and it probably is still happening, is that people uh, get off the addiction and then they get inspired to start a clinic, but they haven't done the work of integration and post. And so the reason I'm bringing it up is for those who are looking for Ibogaine providers, that you have to be aware that this is going on. And that's why we're having this conversation about all the things you need to make sure that the clinic you're choosing is doing, right?
Yeah.
So just wanted to, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but from from an applicant's perspective, I encourage people to do their homework. There's a few clinics that are dominating the scene. I mean, when I met a lot of people at the Ibogaine Providers Conference back in Vancouver back in 2012, and I think there were like 50 people worldwide with some clinics and underground providers and stuff. And that was back in 2012. So what are we now? So it's 14 years ago or something. And now there's somebody was just telling me that there's 17 clinics just in the Cancun area. So everything's a lot bigger now than it was, and of course expanding even more, especially with the the kind of exposure that Ibogaine has had, and what have you. So back in the earlier years, yeah, a lot of us that were working with Ibogaine come into Ibogaine because of our own personal experiences with addiction, and then being touched by the medicine itself, and then of course you just want to go and share that. I did the same thing, after my treatment. I mean, I'd wanted to work with it for a long time, but that was so a lot of people that were involved in Ibogaine come from addiction as well. And yeah, some people, they're providers that have relapsed, you know. Because it's not a magic bullet or anything like that. And then, of course, working with Ibogaine, if somebody's got struggles with addiction, working with Ibogaine will push all the buttons that need to be pushed to push you back into addiction. So yeah, people have to be in a good place, and so it's important that when people are thinking about taking Ibogaine is that they're very careful about where they go. And that's not necessarily the ones that have the biggest name. That just kind of means in many respects that they've had better SEO people working for them or spent a lot on marketing. And I'm not to say that it's bad or anything, but there are a lot of people out there that don't get much market share, and yet they have an awful lot of experience.
Right.
So that is something to think about, though. There's been some shady stuff going on in the ibogaine world because it's unregulated, and so,
Exactly. Yeah,
yeah.
that's the whole problem, isn't it?
Mm.
Is that it's unregulated, and so uh, uh, you know,
I think a lot of people can do some of their own investigation now, though. We would get quite a lot of referrals and stuff from people from Reddit, because
yeah,
they read what other people have said, or so I think it's important for people to do as much homework as they can before they choose who they're going to go and work with, and talk to as many people as possible.
right.
A lot of people in addiction are pretty savvy people as well, and so do a lot of calls, call a lot of
Right. And
clinics.
if someone is not doing those things like blood panels and EKG, and if they're not monitoring
Oh, I don't know.
too much,
There was some guys that were doing some low dose root bark stuff that I met at the Ibogaine Providers Conference in 2012. And I remember they were the only guys that I'd ever heard of that were not asking for ECGs and stuff like that. And somebody asked them, because they did a presentation, and somebody asked them and said, so you guys aren't asking people for ECGs and blood work and stuff? And they said, no, we're not giving people anything like the doses that you guys are. And so that's the only time that I've ever heard of anybody not asking for that. You know,
can,
it,
can
so yeah.
can you talk about that, the EKG and the cardiac risk? Why the EKG is important and the cardiac risk, and what happens?
Oh, well, of course we want to see that somebody's got a healthy heart. And that's important with working with Ibogaine. You don't need to get ECGs and blood work if you're going to a mushroom retreat or anything like that. We
Right.
don't have nurses and medical staff or a doctor on staff in places that are serving mushrooms. Mushrooms are one of the safest things that you can take, but Ibogaine is not. Not to say that Ibogaine is inherently dangerous, but there are certain people that should not receive the medicine. I mean, it's a complicated thing. It has the power to do a lot of good, but with that power comes the possibility of doing harm if it's given to the wrong people at the wrong time with the wrong drugs on board. you know. And then also people that are in addiction are often can be quite run down. alcohol that kind of washes out nutrients in people and stuff, and stimulant users, and so there's things that it's very important. QT interval is one of the main things we're looking for. When I get an ECG land on the desk, of course, the first thing I'm going to look for is that there's a normal sinus rhythm. But the next thing I'll be looking at is QT interval. So, QT, some and that's QT intervals like repolarization of the heartbeats. It's electrical, and some people have prolonged QT, and that they might not be good candidates for flood dosing. It doesn't mean to say they can't take Ibogaine or Iboga. It just means in what kind of doses. So, and it's not all about flood dosing either, which is a big misconception in the Ibogaine world.
Hmm.
So, but yeah, we can tell a lot about somebody's condition by an ECG. I don't make the final decisions around that stuff. That goes to the medical team. I might be get scrutinized by more than one medical professional if we have queries about something or other. So, safety is really important. Nobody should lose their life because they're trying to tackle addiction. So. But again, that ECG, we worked with a lot of people over the years that other clinics wouldn't work with. And that was just because of the way we worked with them. Claire Wilkins was a big mentor for me in my early years. We would get an ECG that wouldn't look very good, and she'd say, no, you can still work with them. It's how you work with them, and not these super high doses. The higher the dose you go up in, the more shift there would be with the QT interval. And
So what
also,
you,
somebody's not well nourished or something like that. So it's important that people are, and that they're in good shape when they come to work with the medicine and certain drugs. If you've got other drugs on board that prolong QT as well, well, that can be fatal. So again, this is all kind of stuff that you go through with screening.
it's a good point what you're saying about, you have to be healthy enough because it takes energy to do ibogaine, to do a drug.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like it's sucking goodness out of you.
Yeah.
Even though he's just lying there in bed, it's gone with the electrolytes and what have you. So people really need to be in well nourished and well hydrated, electrolytes and everything on board. So yeah, it's important because it's heavy work on the body. You know, it's doing a lot, and therefore it needs you to be in good shape in order to receive the medicine. So, yeah.
Do you think it's important for the practitioner, the person who's serving the ibogaine, to have done the medicine themselves and to
Oh yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. I just did it just over a week ago for the first time in 10 years. And one of our nurses did it as well, who'd never really worked with psychedelics. But I mean, she's sitting with people. And so it's important to us that eventually all of our staff will have done it. So as they know what these people are going through. I mean, because if you don't know, it just looks like they're lying there asleep or something, and they're very wobbly when you have to take them to the bathroom. But like all kinds of stuff can be going on, a huge life review, a lot can be happening. So, and it's different from other psychedelics as well. I mean, Ibogaine is, yes, it's a classic tryptamine, but it's also dissociative like ketamine and 5-MeO, and then it's an oneric as well. So it's got three different things going on, which can be an awful lot, for people. So it's important that, of course, that the people that are serving the medicine have an understanding of what's going on.
It's very different from the healthcare paradigm, where doctors don't necessarily have to have experienced the medicine that they're prescribing or giving. It's
Right.
very different.
Yeah.
And that's because of the psychedelic or onerogenic aspect of it, correct? It's because it takes you into that altered state also. So there's
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Well, coming more from the underground, I mean, it wouldn't have been the case that, somebody hadn't taken it, you know. So, but as
Right.
we're moving into more of a clinical stuff, so yeah, I think it's important that,
Oh,
and why wouldn't somebody want to anyhow? Unless they were excluded for a certain reason, why wouldn't you want to know more about what it is that's going on with the people that you're working with? You know, that's pretty important.
right,
So,
right.
yeah.
There's a couple questions here. So it says with the emergence, Caroline is asking, with the emergence of smoke shop synthetics
Yeah.
constantly evolving in the USA, what do you recommend for facilitators to stay up to date on safety and best practices when prepping clients to receive Ibogaine,
Yeah.
especially with most of these synthetics requiring longer washout times than first expected?
Yes, yeah, I know. Well, yeah, I mean, things have changed a lot since just in the short time that, I'm going into year 15, I think, working with Ibogaine now, and the landscape has completely changed, especially when it comes to opioids, you know. So we're kind of in this situation because of the drug war, and if we could just have heroin back. But of course, heroin isn't going to cut it anymore. With a lot of people like fentanyl, some of the early people that we had, there was still heroin in the beginning, and there was still heroin in Vancouver. But quite quickly, fentanyl started taking over in the form of pills, knockoff OxyContin pills, and what have you. So fentanyl started coming in, and then a lot of stuff with kratom, and because more and more people were taking kratom because they were told that it was benign, and good for workout. We worked with a police officer from Edmonton that had gotten themselves hooked on kratom, just through because they were told, that it was this benign workout booster or something or other. Heard it on Joe Rogan or something like that. So kratom already started bringing in complications around QT and stuff, and actually just loose leaf kratom can be a real difficult one in the long term. People are bouncing back out of heroin much easier than people were from just loose leaf kratom. So this 7-OH stuff is like, ugh. And what's it going to be next? Is I see they're trying to ban this stuff all over the place, and like it's the drug war that's got us into this position anyhow.
There'll be something else, even
There'll
if
be,
they.
yeah, exactly. There'll be some other kind of opioid that will. So yeah, but and then that's also been difficult for us because we don't have a doctor that's prescribing opiates for us right now. Here we are working with people, but they're people that have been most of our opiate clients are people that have been switched to morphine through a doctor that we have in the States. So
Can you talk about that?
we're dealing with quite low dose opioid stuff compared to what we were dealing with back in Canada, which was, it wouldn't be unusual to have somebody roll in on 1,500 milligrams of morphine by the time we stabilize them and stuff. And so, yeah, there has to be a longer washout. Like Suboxone, I come from the old school, and that's always been 90 days to get that stuff completely out of the system, and there's some hoops to jump through for people, and that's just unfortunate. And so we haven't dealt too much with this 7-OH, but I've been hearing horror stories. A friend of mine had to stabilize somebody that came in on 7-OH, and it was 1,500 milligrams of OxyContin to stabilize them, which is about 2,000 milligrams of morphine, something like that, from some stuff that they were getting from the smoke shop.
Huh. Um,
So, it's yeah. So it's a tricky situation, and yeah, and so it deserves much more time, and then of course more time costs more money, and I think that one of the bigger clinics is saying now that if they're doing fentanyl detoxes, that's 3 weeks, so
but this is what is called
it's like
short
over
acting.
$1,000 or something like that. So
So is this what you're referring to, what is called a short acting detox?
yeah, it's rolling over to a short acting opiate. Yeah, yeah, which is very difficult to get in. in the States to find a doctor that will do that,
So they have to do it in residence at your if they come,
Yeah, they would do, yes. Yeah.
and that's what most clinics do, is do it in residence.
Yeah, and then then it would be a certain washout time, depending on the half-life of something. We normally go on 5 half-lives, and then we're okay to go in. Which is something like 3 weeks with methadone, and the half-lives would be less than that with Suboxone, but just through experience, and then also being, I was taught by the old school that had a old school underground providers that you have a lot of experience in that, so these are the kind of old school rules. So yeah, it's
And
and
so they're not the new school rules doing the, what is the new school?
well, I've heard, but we had a guy come to us in back in January. Oh no, sorry, a little bit later than that. But he had already been to a clinic in Tijuana where they told him 30 days off of Suboxone will be fine. And so I think that they tried to, so he spent a month with them on morphine, and they tried to get him to do it at 21 days, and he was going, that's not what I've been reading, and so he then at 30 days, he did the treatment, and he left in complete withdrawal. Everybody else seemed to be fine, and he found morphine in a pharmacy there in Tijuana, and so he was able to, stabilize on that for a bit, and then we introduced him to our doctor, and then he spent another 3 months, I think, before he came in to work with us, and had a completely different experience
Right.
compared
This is a
to.
reality check that you're talking about for people. They think they can just go for a week and do it and come back, like you said, squeezing
Yeah,
in.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, that's the learning curve, and a very expensive one for people, So, and that's something they should also be they should try and educate themselves as much as they can on what it is they're about to get into, So. And then listen, because I've spoken to people on the phone, and we're like, yeah, no, 90 days, need you off of that for 90 days. And they're going like, well, we've already spoken to a bunch of clinics, and some are saying, oh, just come on down, 2 weeks will be fine. And out of we're the eighth clinic, and we're the first people that have said 90 days to them.
Hmm. Wow.
So, you know.
Right.
I don't we tend to keep to ourselves quite a bit. We don't really know what's going on out, and apart from the feedback that we get from other people that of course I'm in contact with other providers, but they're more people that are more in line with the kind of work that we do,
Mhm.
like that I've met at the Awake meeting, or one of the Gita gatherings. Whereas there's these other people that are running clinics, they've never come to one of our conferences. They don't do that. I've never heard of them because they just don't show up. Do you know what I mean? And so, which would be good if they did, because that's
They could learn more, and that's kind of how people have learned from each other in the Ibogaine community.
well, exactly. Well, especially more so in that old school. When the people that I met at that first conference in Vancouver. So.
Right.
And other people I've met through those people, so
Right.
yeah.
There's a question here, a really good question here that I wanted to ask from Kyra. She's saying, what do you wish people would consider more in their prep before Iboga?
Yeah, well, we always hook people up with integration specialists to do that. It's not just about coming and doing the Ibogaine. So I find that with a lot of people, if they attach to a pre-treatment protocol, which might give them a lot of things to think about before they're coming in to do the work,
Right.
and then also afterwards as well. It's not just about coming to do the thing, you know. One of my provider friends used this analogy, and it's a good one. If you can imagine people like a glass of water, Tom, for example. Oh, Tom's like a glass of water. Yeah, we don't see too much in Tom. And then coming to do the Ibogaine, it's like throwing Alka-Seltzer into the glass. Oh, suddenly there's a lot of activity. Oh, look, it's bubbling up over the surface. So it's really important to have somebody to work with, should that happen. And another analogy is like having your snow globe shaken up. And people don't often understand about what it is they're stepping into, you know.
Yeah,
And
if you're doing it for the first time,
yeah,
psychedelics in general, and I,
yeah. No, it needs to be taken very seriously,
right.
and then so
Yeah, so that's why we're setting up this. We've set up a wake and we've created a directory of integration providers and a 9 month
yeah.
online journey post Ibogaine or any other entheogen that anyone can
Yeah.
participate
Yeah,
in.
yeah, not just Ibogaine, but all of them, and people get a lot more out of it. I mean, I always say to people, like, it's all very well to come and take Ibogaine, but what are you going to do with it? And it's because it's not a magic pill or a magic cure or anything like that. And often shakes up the snow globe and creates a lot of neuroplasticity. But it's what you do with that neuroplasticity that's most important. And yeah, so people have a tendency, like, especially when you listen to things like Americans for Ibogaine, and I applaud what they're trying to do and bringing it more into the public sphere. But like the stuff that was spoken about in the Oval, in the White House and in the Oval Office and stuff with Bro Rogan and Donald Trump. Rogan was throwing out some pretty wrong, inconsistent statistics there.
12 hours and you're done.
I
That was
know, yeah, yeah. Well, yes, yeah, and so it's important that people don't believe that hype. It's not like that at all. So, but it's important as to what people do with the process, and that's why having some kind of integration specialist to work with you through this process, and it's not just like all about the medicine. In the beginning, I was an evangelist, like that Brian Hubbard guy as well. But then because I was hanging out and working in a clinic for, pretty much after like the first couple of years, I was like, oh yeah, this isn't quite you know, as clean cut or cut and dry as I thought.
but at the
You
same
learn
time,
that through experience. So I see why people get that idea. It was just over like a year and a half ago when they had first had Brian Hubbard and Rick Perry on to Joe Rogan's show. And for many years, right in the beginning, when people would come, we'd say, "Well, how did you find out about this?" And they'd say, "Oh, Joe Rogan." But after that one, we got something like 30 applications overnight, and most of those people were like, "What do you mean it's a minimum of 5 days?" I was told it was 48 hours or less, or do you know what I mean? So that's just a public misconception. It's
right,
it's
it
through
did the
that.
job of bringing it in front of a lot of people, which was great. It's great that now
Yeah,
there's money for it and all that. But yeah, the
not
misconception
realistic.
about it is what we're
Yeah.
trying to
Yeah,
correct.
no, I'm not trying to downplay its efficacy because it can be completely life-changing people, but it's not as simple as what
It's
they
definitely
portray.
miraculous and
Yeah.
wonderful and amazing that it can do what it does. There's no
Yeah.
question that there's
Yeah, but
nothing.
yeah, there's this huge, big misconception, and this stuff, that I'll be free from addiction in a certain amount of hours or whatever, especially in opioids. I mean, that's a process. You got to allow that medicine to metabolize through the system and stuff, and it can be an uncomfortable journey, but it's greatly reduced opiate withdrawals, but it's not like this, I can magically just walk away and not have any post-acute withdrawal syndrome or anything like that. Often the opiate people, their first 30 days can be pretty testy. And it's not usually until people are into the second month that they start to feel really good, as some of the post-acute withdrawal stuff kind of clears up. And it's stuff that would drive a lot of people nuts, constant diarrhea, insomnia, things like that. But usually after Ibogaine, then those things aren't as annoying because you're generally in a much better headspace mentally. But it's still a process that people have to go through. And of course, the longer we've been in addiction and the heavier the use, well, the more work has to be done, to clean that up. And that's also why we don't usually like to work with a lot of younger people. We will do, but
We're not ready for the
Well,
discomfort.
right, that discomfort, and also we come from a society, especially with younger people now, they just haven't had to go through a lot of discomfort and stuff, and it's even more like this instant gratification thing, and so that's where somebody might learn that it's not as easy as that, and might be coming back for a second treatment at some point, with a better head on their shoulders about the work that they have to do. Because again, it's all about the work. Like I said, it's all very well come and take this medicine, but what are you going to do with it? We always say that people that come from
Hey,
the couch and go back to the couch are the ones that relapse.
go
Because
back to the
they
well.
got to do a lot of work afterwards, especially the opiate people. They've really got to work on that endorphin system, you know,
Oh,
and
right.
get
So
that re
physiologically, there's work to be done.
yeah,
And then
yeah,
there's
yeah.
psychologically, there's work to be done on your,
Totally, totally. And that's where an integration specialist can really help with that process as well.
right.
So
Yeah, and
the more
also,
support you can get around a treatment, the better, really.
right. And also the trauma, for example, it may not come up at your ibogaine treatment. It may not come up at all until later down the road.
Yeah,
And then also the other thing, which I have learned from doing a lot of psychedelics, is that you get really high, you're going to get really low. It's just you're going to go back down
yeah,
to your normal state of consciousness, and you wouldn't like it because you've been in
yeah,
this high state and you've seen yourself in a different way. And then,
yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, the glow doesn't last forever, eventually, and life will come around and slap you in the face because that's what life does. The RMO is to go and use something that's going to make that slap in the face less painful. And that's what we've been doing. So it's about retraining yourself as well to not fall back into that kind of repetitive behavior and to be able to sit with ourselves and sit with our uncomfortable feelings, which we're not very good at. Like these things,
yeah,
people en masse now, we're distracted from our uncomfortable feelings. We can just go straight to YouTube or whatever, and
get
distraction,
some
distraction,
information.
distraction, which is what the drugs do anyhow, in a lot of respects. So,
Right. So it's about discipline and it's about
yeah,
concentration and
yeah,
awareness, and it's a
yeah,
process.
and that kind of evolutionary jump can be really assisted with the medicine,
Yeah.
and it helps us make that kind of leap, which we often do through life anyhow. We read a good book, a self-help book that might change a lot of our perspective and stuff. So, yeah,
Some way to shift your energy really is works if you can learn how to do that. It,
yeah, yeah,
right.
and finding some meaningful purpose in life as well,
Yeah,
instead
very
of being
important.
another cog in the in the wheel of production, whatever. And for a lot of people, that takes a long time. I didn't really find what I wanted to do in life or really found the groove until I was 45. I got sober at 35, and so I got my life together to a certain degree, and it was not so chaotic and stuff, but it wasn't until I really found something that was deep and meaningful for me that made a big shift for myself personally as well. So,
Did
but I mean,
something
that
happen?
could be anything, go and help at the wildlife center, you know, so.
Did something happen to catalyze that at 45 for you? When you did
Yeah, I
something?
took Ibogaine.
Oh, that was when you took ibogaine.
Yeah, and then quite quickly, I took it in August and got encouragement from people like Paul Featherstone, and then I took it in August, and then I was just banging on people's doors and saying, being very persistent, and by February I was down in La Mission with James Jackson and Beverly Weaver, and they kindly kind of got me to allowed me to come and assist them and kind of showed me the ropes, you know. And then Claire took me underneath her wing after that, and informed me a lot about working with the medicine, which is, something that happened for her as well. So, you know, so I still draw on people like that when I have something that's, I have queries about something, so people that we've met along the way. So.
Do you have, so you were working in Canada at the time. Maybe we could go to
Yeah,
Boston about from Jan about
yeah.
why you had to move, or do you feel comfortable talking about that?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Jen. Yeah. Well, when I first started, I opened the first business with another guy, and that was called Liberty Root, and Ibogaine was a an unlicensed natural health product at the time, and um, so there weren't too many barriers to actually starting doing the work, and and there had been Sandra Carpetas had run the Iboga Therapy House on the Sunshine Coast before then, up until that point. Mark Emery had been doing some stuff with Ibogaine. So, and that all finished, and then we just picked that up. And I think I was working for 2.5 years with Liberty Root, or 3.5, something like 3.5 years maybe. And and there was a split in that business. And while Blair and I had started the Inner Realms, a friend of mine called me up one day and said, "Hey, did you see that Ibogaine has been rescheduled in Canada?" And I was like, "What?" It's the first I've heard of that. And yeah, I went to Health Canada's website, and sure enough, it had been rescheduled like 18 months or 16 months, I think it was before, into a Schedule 6. And we just carried on working in civil disobedience, basically. But Vancouver's a kind of a psychedelic sanctuary city, if you will. There's an awful lot of ayahuasca going on. There's something like 50 mushroom dispensaries in Vancouver now, or maybe 30 or something like that, which is an awful lot. I could see how cannabis dispensaries would still stay open because people smoke cannabis all the time. People don't take mushrooms all the time. I might take psilocybin maybe once or twice a year, but a lot of people were, so it was very open, and so we just carried on working until we couldn't, and then we got some attention from the powers that be and had to leave. So, which
Mhm.
is just the evolution of Inner Realms, really. We knew that it wasn't sustainable to stay in Canada forever. And so, yeah, we had to move. Which is, we always had to have nurses working with us when we were back in Canada, you know, and but now we have a doctor on staff and stuff like that. So we have an ambulance with paramedics parked outside when we're doing any flood dosing or anything. So yeah, so the evolution needed to happen, but that's kind of why we had to leave Canada. And they seem to be clamping down a little bit on different practitioners and stuff. There's not really anything they can do about the dispensaries, the mushroom dispensaries. The police don't want to have anything to do with it. They're very busy with fentanyl and crack cocaine and methamphetamine. Thank you very much. And so, the people taking psychedelics is mostly people wanting to, you know, have an alternative to things like that and alcohol. And most people are trying to better their lives through, that kind of thing. So,
I wanted to ask you about that, what you said about these mushrooms or other things being an alternative because they're plant medicines and they're non-addictive,
yeah.
and you really can't continue to take it because it won't work anymore
Right.
after.
Yeah.
So it's a very good way, and I think the transition that seems to me more ideal than sobriety and abstinence and all that really kind of grim stuff is to be able to transition after I begin to find these other sorts of ways to alter your consciousness so that you can
Yeah.
continue to keep up the momentum of what you started with Ibogaine, but you don't have to do that expensive treatment again, you know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, I always encourage, because this is what I think happens if you work with psychedelics in the right way. Then this is what happened with the LSD. Right? Did the LSD cure me? Mm, I never wanted to drink after that, but I feel that what happened was that I connected with the innate healer that resides within us all, and it's contacting that part of ourselves. And so that often is what happens through an Ibogaine treatment. A lot of profound realizations, can happen with us, and it's not necessarily the ibogaine per se. It's allowing us to have that contact with that part of ourselves, that seems to know all of the answers. You know, I'd spent like 6 years in and out of from going to rehab to actually putting a plug in the jug. I spent years of going to meetings, which I didn't particularly want to do, and sometimes 3 times a day, and it was when I did the LSD that everything just kind of dropped. It's like the penny dropped. And a lot of stuff that I'd been hearing, I could suddenly understand. And so I feel that's what happening when we do the psychedelics in the right way, with the right intention and with the right container and the right support around you, and also having, that support, integration support afterwards as well. So continuous psychedelic work, it isn't like, oh, now, it's a maintenance thing and I've got to take this in order, it's not like methadone or Suboxone or anything like that. But I encourage people to connect with a certain medicine where they can connect with themselves in a much deeper way. And that's how we can stay on, on the path, so to speak, you know.
Yeah, I also think that after you've done psychedelics, like you're saying, it connects you with yourself, and then you find that it connects you with life in different ways and things that you
Mhm.
didn't find so pleasurable. Just simple
Mhm.
things like going for a walk, or you end up becoming more present and more able to enjoy
Yeah.
life without
Yeah,
needing to
exactly.
amp everything up all the time.
Yeah. Well, it's like a clearing that happens in many respects, you know. Because the drug use, the problematic drug use isn't really the problem. That's our answer to the problem, you know. So once that's taken away, it's about reconnecting with life.
Yeah, well, the problems are so many also that we have a culture that
Mhm.
make wants to make us cogs in a wheel, and it's hard to find a deep, meaningful sense of purpose and find a way to actually make it because there's so many. So it's, uh, but at least if you're showing up for it, you're going to be able to have a better chance at.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. 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 So yeah, again, so the continued medicine work. Again, it's done in the right ways. But and then that can be a very personal thing as well. Some of my most spiritually uplifting times might have been, dancing in the desert at 5 a.m. or something, doing another hit of acid or something like that. It's a
Turning
little
down.
bit different for everybody,
Yeah.
but that kind of deeper connection with yourself and life around you, so. You don't just have to be taking psychedelics as well. It's also having the discipline to take the time to go and be in nature, to go nature bathe. You know,
Mhm.
we used to do that a lot when we were in Canada. We'd take people out walking a lot in the forest and stuff, and people would say, "What do you guys do in your spare time?" And we'd be like, "This." Yeah, we come here into this forest when we're not working as well. As part of our own taking care of ourselves. So.
Yeah, so
Have
healing, so
discipline
healing.
to do that as well. Not stay on the couch on your phone.
Yeah, it's
Which
hard to
might,
change those little habits too. You
yeah,
have to.
yeah, I know. And for younger people, that's all they know. Like, for us that were older, especially, if you're in your 50s and 60s, well, we were given incredibly long leashes and basically told to go and play and don't come back until it's dark. So we did a lot in our lives, not on these or, like Call of Duty or I'm too old to have been affected by the gaming thing.
Me
Space
too.
Invaders was the closest we got to that. That you played on a machine and or Asteroids or something. But then yeah, no, I wouldn't know the first thing about PlayStations or anything like that. So we have a bit of an advantage because
I
we got
agree.
that from our youth, whereas people that are younger than us, that's all they know in a lot of respects, you know. So
Right. So there again, Ibogaine is forcing you to go within There's
Yeah.
that's where the action's happening. It's not outside. It's not.
Oh, yeah, I know. And then we come from a world of externalities, and so yeah.
It's the antidote. There's another question here from Apollo. Hi, Apollo. How are you?
Yeah,
Uh,
well,
have you had the chance to treat someone on fentanyl with tranquilizers? Um, that's the question.
no, no, just because it's been out of our scope of doing things. Um, we worked with a lot of people on fentanyl, right from back in the early years. It was very quickly it went into the world of fentanyl. Um, but in Canada, we were able to switch people to morphine for long periods of time. But then it became very complicated because we didn't have a lot of access to benzodiazepines in Canada. The ones I did work with, I was bringing back from Mexico. So we haven't done that. People like Tom Leonard, Anselmo, he's much more versed in dealing with things like trank and stuff like that. So I don't quite honestly know a lot about it. And if I had somebody that we were trying to support through that kind of treatment, I'd be reaching out to other people like Apollo that might have experience of that, or Tom, or also maybe the guys over at Iboga Quest as well, because they've been dealing a lot with
They
the
said they
fentanyl
stopped taking those people with who are doing 7OH. That's what Barry said at that they
Sorry,
have.
what was that?
Barry said at Iboga Quest said that they stopped taking people with 7OH because it's very hard for them to actually
Yeah,
clear up.
and yeah, the stabilization and the period of time that you need to stabilize somebody for as well, so it can run into a long time. And those people also need a lot of it's not like you can just go to their Airbnb and give them their meds and stuff like that. They've kind of got to be supervised and taken care of, and
So,
held in a container right up to the point of doing medicine. We're
right.
quite
So
fortunate. We are where we are in Mexico is because there's not a lot of drugs available and stuff. But if you're in TJ or in Cancun and places like that, a bit of a logistical nightmare, because of what people can what the taxi driver might be able to be trying to sell you and stuff like that. Or, younger people also have really easy access to drugs through through Instagram and
internet and everything, right?
yeah, and just Telegram and stuff. And they can be very, very resourceful. So, and they're still an active addiction, so they need to be taken care of in a container responsibly.
Right. Apart
So
from addiction, do you work with veterans as well? Work
yes,
with
yeah,
TBI, and
yeah,
can you
yeah.
talk a little bit about that? Like, what kind
Yeah,
of
well, I mean, it gets more attention that, you're working with people with PTSD and stuff like that. But, quite honestly, all of the drug people are PTSD as well. If they didn't have PTSD, which led them into drug use anyhow, or complex PTSD from childhood, adverse childhood situations, then there's a lot of PTSD that they get from engaging in problematic drug use, and the situations you find yourself in. I'm like, holy shit. But yeah, the veterans as well. I mean, a lot of them are coming from combat and have experienced a lot of trauma through that. But interesting, like as you see in Waves and War, the joining the military was just something that young traumatized men do anyhow. You know.
use an escape from?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, yeah. And find, that sense of family and camaraderie that we just yearn for. Some guys find it in the military. I found it in the free festival community. And you're drawn to your community and stuff. So, but yeah, a lot of those guys have TBIs from ordnance. Just
From
being close to ordnance all the time. Bombs going off
oh,
stuff. So there's been a lot of relief around that. We just worked with somebody recently who'd been injured in a car accident, and I'm yet to get on a call with him in the next couple of days. he was in our last group. But his integration specialist said that she saw an amazing turnaround. And from what we've understand, a lot of the relief seems to be found about 30 days out from the initial treatment. So, but yes, we're working more with veterans. I got one here at the moment, actually, with poly drug problems as well. But yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about what is that process of healing for someone who's a veteran, who's dealing with, I don't know if you can give an example or anything, but can you talk a little bit about what is that process? Because it's different than someone in addiction, or are you saying it's the same pretty much?
No, again, I don't think the drugs really are the problem. They're just somebody's answers to the problem. And a lot of veterans as well are coming in on, this med and that med, and a lot of psych meds and stuff,
In that.
in which they're getting through the VA or whatever to deal with their symptoms, So like pretty much everybody we work with, like nobody's whistling Dixie when they get to us, So the process I feel with everybody is a very individual one, you know. So, and again with the vets, it's not really so much about what they've experienced necessarily in combat, but it often goes a lot deeper than that, you know. And I can think of a vet that we had recently, and a lot of his stuff was childhood stuff, So and the process is very individual from one person to the next. So I wouldn't want to kind of lump people in a certain group, in a certain category. They're coming from a certain group, but again, it's a very individual thing that people are going through,
It's your
We're
own
very
personal learning.
diverse as human beings, and the problems are diverse and everything, we might end up in the same place, with complex PTSD or anything like that, the path and drug use and everything, the path is very different getting to that place, but then we find ourselves in that very same place, and that's why people are coming for treatment, and then the recovery from that, or the healing, also looks very different from one person to the next. The same as
Yeah.
trauma with veterans. Some veterans are it's not really about the trauma itself, it's about how it's perceived. Some people come back from war, and it's, a little bit like water off a duck's back, comparatively speaking, to, somebody who might have served in the same, infantry with them. So again, it's a very individual thing. And it's a very individual process. The healing process is very individual from one person to the next. I think we found.
You must have learned a lot about human nature in the process of working with so many people.
Yeah, a bit, in observation, yeah. But I guess biggest takeaway is again, is how diverse that is from with one person to the next. So,
Right.
yeah.
So, your advice for somebody, can you talk a little bit about aftercare as something
Yeah.
starting to do more of, and how that a window right after?
Yeah. Well, there's a critical window of neuroplasticity that there is immediately afterwards, and particularly with Ibogaine as well, and working with 5-MeO, there's a lot of neuroplasticity. So it's very important as to what people do with that. In an ideal world where we didn't have to worry about resources, I would say, come and work with us for as long as the resources would allow, because it allows me to get more Ibogaine into people, which I'm a firm believer of. It's not just about the flood dose. If I can have people longer, then I get heavy boosters into them. I find that increases the neuroplasticity with people, extends that window even longer. And if we can get some boosters to people somehow or another, then that's also pretty important. So in an ideal world, I'd say come and work with us, and I'm going to pack you off to an Ibogaine aftercare facility for 90 days in an ideal world. But we do not live in an ideal world at all. And if we did, a lot of people wouldn't be coming for treatment anyhow. So it's really, but I don't think that can be overlooked, and that does look different for everybody, but it's really important as to what you do immediately afterwards. has a lot to do with how that unfolds. And I don't think that people should think of their treatment, oh, my Ibogaine treatment was like this. You shouldn't frame it in such a way because it's an unfolding. And of course, the more that we can focus on that unfolding and the more time that we can have before we have to jump back into a busy life, then the more we're going to get from the experience, you know. So, so that looks different for everybody, but you know, some people, if again, if they're trying to, I'm reluctant to treat somebody who's trying to squeeze a treatment in between. Do you know what I mean? Oh, I've got this time then, and then I'm going back to work, and I'm like, well, you're not given it. You know, you're back to work, then there's all of these distractions. You know, you're right back into life again. And it's really about sitting with whatever is bubbling up afterwards. It's that might be uncomfortable as well, but then that's where that healing process comes in, you know, as
Yeah,
I'll
you need
yeah.
drawdown time,
Yeah.
right? You
Like,
need
well, you
time
know,
to
if people are going to rehab and stuff, you know, a lot of those places are minimum of 90 days. And, you know, Ibogaine again, it's like appealing for people. It's like, oh, I can squeeze a treatment in and then I won't be an addict. You know, well, it's like,
not gonna work.
so the more you can throw at something, the better return you get. And I don't mean just mean money, you know. So if somebody has the ability to be able to, you know, go to some kind of aftercare facility, which we pretty much want for anybody that's coming for opiates, you know, because their system will be, I mean, every time somebody gives up opiates for a period of time, then their tolerance is drastically reduced. But when people take Ibogaine, their tolerance is scrubbed back to zero, you know, so they're particularly vulnerable. It's always been a big concern of ours that we might lose somebody afterwards because they've gone home and relapsed and then died, you know.
Right, right.
So then
And
we
that's
have lost some people along the way, not because of that they've gone home and done that. You know, the relapse has happened like a year or two later or something, and they haven't survived it. You know, but that's always been a concern of ours. So the more that people can do in some kind of aftercare, the better, because then they're getting more from their treatment. And
right.
like I say, it's not just about coming and doing the Ibogaine, it's what they're going to do with it afterwards. You know, and that's
Right.
really where the positive
Nice
change is made,
potential.
you know. So yeah, but unfortunately, you know, Ibogaine treatments are expensive because there's an awful lot that goes into them, and a lot of people don't really understand that. And
I think
then having more money left over afterwards to go to, you know, to some kind of aftercare, and which there are not a whole lot of different options for that, you know. But you know,
well,
that
we're
could be
starting
as simple
one
as going to stay on Uncle Bill's farm in Saskatchewan for
if you can
a
do
month or
that.
two, you know, so you can just sit and be with whatever's coming up in a safe environment, you know. So yeah, and
Yeah.
when we talk about you know, aftercare, I mean, if people are just coming for psycho-spiritual, you know, it's super important to allow themselves to have time off afterwards so they can sit and be with whatever's coming up. Like I say, you know, Ibogaine treatment should be taken very seriously because it can really shake up your snow globe, you know.
So it's a bit like the challenge of making time to do this is a part of the
Yeah,
process. You got to make enough
exactly.
time.
Yeah. And having the sense of, you know, that you're worth investing that time. You know, I think of doing this work as a personal investment
Yeah.
into people. But then a lot of people that feel worthless, that's why they use drugs anyhow, you know, or they have that kind of like poor opinion of themselves, which has been built up often from a very young age, you know. So it's being able to allow yourself that kind of self-love, you know, and investment into the time afterwards. Because again, it's not just about doing the medicine, it's about what you do with that medicine and that neuroplasticity. So it's actually super important that people focus a lot on that, I feel. Did that answer the question?
Yep. Yeah, I
Okay,
did.
I hope I'm touching in on all 10 things here.
Well, I think you have. So we've got this Ibogaine safety checklist that's going to become part of this this podcast. So I'm just going to share that. Um, let me see. Where are you? Oh, here it is. I'll just share that with the group here. Um, and so there's that, and then there's the long-term integration. And so the long-term integration, you need a community. They say that it takes a village to heal, and that's sort of what we're creating, is this village on awake.net of healers who can help people, not just with ibogaine treatments, which is the big granddaddy is the ibogaine treatment, but after that, you might be able to do a little breath work or learn how to
Oh,
do some kind of a cleanse,
yeah,
or go to some energy healer or a
yeah,
therapist, or there are so
yeah.
many avenues of
Self-care.
self-care, right?
Yeah, which
um,
we often are really lacking in, you know. So
yeah, and
yeah,
people don't understand, right, how easy it is to do some of that
yeah,
post ibogaine, to prolong the journey of changing yourself, because
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, community is important. I think that's what most people get a lot out of the rooms, is that you're forced to be in community. You know, people have to they go to meetings. They're forced to get off their seat, go, and lack of isolation, because that's what we do in addiction, is isolate. And that's not necessarily addiction to drugs, but that could be addiction to
isolation. Oh yeah, right.
isolation. So community is super important, and then how people find that is, again, it's quite an individual thing, you know. But yeah.
Right. So does anybody else have any questions? Oh, here's Caroline said is talking about. Oh, last week we had Richard Hyde talking about EMDR and Ibogaine, and it's really a great episode, because he talks about using EMDR as a self-regulatory tool. So he teaches people how to do it themselves,
Mhm.
not necessarily to go to a therapist or EMDR
Yeah.
person.
Mhm.
Oh,
Yeah.
here's
Yeah, EMDR. I can't speak a lot on stuff like EMDR. I'm not very experienced in it personally. So
yeah, different strokes for different folks. I think you find different things.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
yeah,
different people are drawn to different things as well. But other things that we can do just personally, like things like meditation, maybe breath work, stuff like that, nature bathing, which allows us to kind of calm down our nervous system and regulate it a bit. There's a lot that we get from spending time in nature, even if it's just at the park or something. Being out in nature, I think is pretty important.
yeah, sitting on the ground, EMFs. This is known. The science is there about EMFs helping your, just helping you to feel better and to balance out. Also, I think I read an article about how walking in the forest, well, trees are send chemical messages to each other, and those chemical messages, as they kind of pass through you, apparently help you,
Yeah,
um, with your immunity. So,
right. So there really is something to tree hugging.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah. The
Um,
hippies and conservationists are onto something. Yeah.
yeah. So, does anybody else have any questions? Otherwise, I think we can close the meeting, unless Gareth, you want to share anything else.
No, I can't think of right off the top of my head. As soon as we close the meeting, I'll be going, and I should have brought up this up and that up. But no, not really.
Two questions came
Just
up.
just it's important that people take this kind of work seriously. And if people are thinking about coming to do Ibogaine, then, like the more you take it seriously, the more you put into something, then the more you're going to get back. And too often people and it's because in many respects because of our culture, that, oh, I'm just going to go and do the thing, and the thing is going to magically cure me. And not to downplay its efficacy, but it just might open the door to a lot of other stuff, and people need to be aware of that, and take this whole thing seriously, and It's what, again, it's about what you do with the medicine after you've taken it and what you do with that neuroplasticity. And also to a certain amount, amount of discipline that we're going to have within ourselves to do all of these things that we know that we should be doing, you know, especially with the opiate users and stuff is like getting to the gym, starting to work out, or, thinking of diet, all of these kind of things, and thinking about our patterns and behaviors, and our vision of how we would like to see ourselves is what we're really shooting for. That new improved version of ourselves, which I know we all have within us. It's just finding that path. So, yeah.
Yeah, somebody else has asked a question about microdosing psilocybin. Guy is asking if microdosing psilocybin could it be helpful with the post Ibogaine flood
Yeah,
dose?
can be. Yeah, can be. Again, everybody's a little bit different. In an ideal world, everybody would be microdosing a little bit of Iboga or Ibogaine, which isn't always accessible. But yeah, what can be done, you know, and yeah, that can be very helpful. Again, it's a very individual thing from one person to the next. What works for one person might not work for another. But yeah, that can help. Ibogaine itself has a pretty powerful antidepressant effect that happens with it. And so I'd like to give it a certain period of time before jumping in with other psychedelics on a regular basis, just because it can muddy the waters a little bit. But yeah. Yeah, I think psilocybin can be very helpful. And because psilocybin is actually a very safe psychedelic to take, it's and being quite accessible now for a lot of people, like all of the mushroom dispensaries downtown in Vancouver. Like you've got your choice of like 20 different strains or more, and different options for microdosing and stuff like that. So it's one of those things where people can start building a personal relationship with something like psilocybin, you know.
Yeah, yeah, definitely with the microdosing.
Yeah,
Psilocybin though is no joke when you take five grams or more. It can be such a massive,
yeah,
massive journey.
yeah. I prefer to work with LSD myself personally, you know. Again, that's about personal choices, and they're all kind of like inroads into ourselves, and deeper parts of ourselves where the answers lie.
Danny Connor is asking about your opinion on 5-MeO after iboga.
Yes, well, this is quite controversial at the moment. Um, we've been serving 5-MeO after treatment, after Ibogaine, for about a decade now. And um, when I went to train down in Mexico in the beginning, one of the other clinics had just started working with Bufo. And I was like, Bufo, what's it? They said, oh, they're doing Bufo at the end of Ibogaine treatments. And Bufo, what's Bufo? And there was, oh, it's 5-MeO. And I was like, oh. And I'd done 5-MeO in Marin County in like 2003 or something. And and then I did Ibogaine in 2011. So this was shortly months afterwards, it was like 4.5 months afterwards. And so I was like, oh, that makes total sense. I totally get that, and then I met my mentor, 5-MeO mentor at the Ibogaine conference in Vancouver. And so I started working on quite a regular basis with her with 5-MeO. And back then it was all insufflated. We hadn't got a freebase in Canada, or wasn't widely available at that point. So I wasn't actually using it in insufflated with people. But then once I got hold of freebase, which happened pretty much as soon as Inner Realm started, when we opened, then that was open to me to start working with it. And so I did. And not with everybody, and we still don't with everybody. And again, it depends. what kind of dose we're working at. We were working with somebody who's with us at the moment with 5-MeO this morning, and we were working in the 2 to 3 milligram range. And that was extremely therapeutic for the person that we were working with, and that's less than most people start with. So it's not all about the big bang. And I don't always know that that's appropriate for everybody. And that's something that we intuitively pick up with somebody when we're working with them. And then again, we don't go we never start. We always start in the shallow end of the pool, metaphorically speaking. We don't throw anybody in the deep end of the pool with anything. Not with 5-MeO, not with Ibogaine, not with anything. With our Ibogaine treatments, we always start with the crowd we have at the moment. We did 2 days of low dosing before we're getting into higher dosing stuff. So we can tell an awful lot about somebody's response to psychedelics when you're working in that way. Plus, it allows people to drop their defenses, particularly with 5-MeO, the egoic structure can go, no, and that can be extremely problematic. So when it comes to 5-MeO, we for the most part, what we're doing is trying to dig deep into people and their trauma. And it's kind of a little controversial, particularly with the more traditional kind of wing of the Ibogaine world. There's a kind of a split. You got the more people that have been initiated in Gabon and stuff, so they might have more of attachment to the more traditional use of Iboga. Whereas I was trained in Northern Baja by ex-drug users. So I come from a place of addiction, so I'm all about what fucking works. And so that's really why, if I didn't think that 5-MeO was a really good accompaniment to working with Ibogaine, then I wouldn't do it. And again, it's about getting into the depths of people's trauma,
What's the
and make
controversy about
it.
it?
Um, Well, I think that there's a lack of preparation that's been going on with some people coming into working with it, and in some respects, you can only prepare people a certain amount for something like the full release and that sense of non-duality. But one of the ways you prep them is by stepping it in very slowly to get to that place. And if people don't want to go there, then that's fine. An awful lot can be done at the lower levels of 5-MeO DMT. And so I feel that, maybe it's a little bit more controversial with again, there's two camps in the 5-MeO world. There's Bufo and then there's 5-MeO. My mentor, it was all insufflated, which is the correct term for sticking shit up your nose, which is quite a different way of experiencing 5-MeO DMT. And the vaporization of it is a very late thing, really. There's no historical, anthropological, history of that. It came about in the 80s. And but the Bufo practitioners have a tendency to throw people right into that state of non-duality. And that's where you get more things like reactivations and stuff happen from that. My mentor who worked with insufflation would rarely ever get anybody, or if she said she'd ever had people talking about reactivations, because it's a much slower
Reaction.
reactivation. Reactivation is like coming back into the medicine. It's a bit, I've been taking LSD for 45 years or something, and I'm still patiently waiting for my acid flashback, which is just like, I don't really know if I've met anybody who's had one of those, but we were told, oh, you're going to get acid flashbacks, and I'm like, still waiting. But with 5-MeO, those reactivations are very real, and they seem to be happening more with people that are, thrown into that deep end of the experience right off the bat. And that's from what I read about more, that that kind of stuff happens more with Bufo, and lack of preparation might be the container. So they're not all perfect containers. and so that's why I think it's controversial because some people, and I'm just reading on some threads, I've heard some pretty, and then I've had people that have come to work with us, and we've spoken about 5-MeO, and they go, no, 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 because they were treated by somebody in a without stepping in slowly. And I remember I had two people here that had done Ibogaine before and had done Bufo, and I couldn't even smudge them with Palo Santo because the smell of Palo Santo already, was activating their nervous system because of what happened to them in their Bufo experience. And they were like, no, I'm not interested in that. No, thank you. And it's really about how it was served to them, which was terrifying. And that's why they have trauma around it. So that's why I think it's controversial.
Mm.
And so,
Yeah, sounds intense. So, the reactivations happen after they go home, or
yeah, I
when?
can do. Yeah, yeah. And a lot of people, if the 5-MeO session has gone well, like after the session, they're like, so how do I make those reactivations happen? But if they're happening night after night and they're, can be very destabilizing, especially if the session itself was destabilizing, then it's like just more of the same. And so, people might need a lot of help through that. We fortunately have never experienced anybody having anything that has been too difficult for them to navigate afterwards. And if there has been any reactivations, it's been for a night or two, and then they've had their journal next to the bed, and instead of a reactivation, it's night school. So as soon as people are like, oh, great, an opportunity to learn more through a reactivation of the medicine of 5-MeO, then as soon as the kind of attitude is switched to that, then they tend to stop. It's when they keep on going, and it's almost like the medicine's trying to teach you, let the fuck go, and that's kind of, it's still teaching people to be stop being resistant. And it's often, from what I can gather, it's the resistance to the medicine which can bring about that reactivation. And as soon as people changing their attitude around what's going on and being more accepting there of that, then the lesson's been learned. But the 5-MeO can be very serious, seriously destabilize people. But again, I think it's got more to do with the preparation and how the container that they were served in and how they might be held afterwards, if they're just kind of left out there on their own, you know. And in my mind, the 5-MeO is almost equally as important as doing the Ibogaine. The two kind of fit together like a yin yang. In my observations, people would not agree with me, but I'm just talking about our observations of what we've seen over the years. The two of them fit together very well, you know. And as soon as I heard that that was happening, that made sense to me long before I'd actually done the two together. So. So, yeah. Does
Um,
that answer the question?
yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, um, and you use synthetic 5-MeO. 5-MeO is
Yeah,
just.
yeah, yeah. Well, we're not vegan now, but we were vegan for the longest time. And so I always like to think that, yeah, no toads were harmed in our pursuit of expanded consciousness.
And there's
So,
virtually no difference between the Bufo experience and the 5-MeO in terms.
well, no, not I don't think, and every time I work with 5-MeO, it's different anyhow when I work with it personally. So I get this thing, that, oh, you've just got to work with the Bufo, I'm like, why? And with Bufo, you aren't exactly sure as to actually how much 5-MeO you're giving to somebody, because that might change from toad to toad, how much 5-MeO is actually in the toxin. And then also you're working in much, like when you're working with Bufo, from what I gather, it's going to be like 4 times as much as you would with the pure molecule. And I've got I can see what I'm doing more when I'm working with the pure molecule, and then there's different routes for administration as well with the pure molecule. You can stick it up your bum, up your nose, now they're doing intramuscular stuff, and also possible IV, which you cannot do with Bufo. Bufo can only be vaporized due to the other toxins that are in there. And then often they use bubble pipes, which a lot of us have, been might have had experience with methamphetamine. So it's like a little icky to be taking something like Bufo through the same device that we used to smoke meth in, So yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why I would say pure molecule, it would be better to be working with. And when you hear about things like um, well, what's the word for it? Like responsible toad or ethical toad collection and stuff. How do you know? How do you know that that's been done ethically? And there's a lot of things that can happen with the toads if they're harvested in the wrong ways. Like they live in a very small area, and if you take them out of that area, that can be very problematic. And then there's a virus that's going around amphibians as well. So how they're handled, you could be spreading the virus. And the toads are just minding their own business. And every time, an animal has some kind of thing that is wanted by humans, it's never very good for that animal,
Mm.
And so, yeah, I don't feel that it's very ethical to be using Bufo. I'm sure people are rolling their eyes when they hear me say something like that. It's just our own personal kind of view around that kind of thing. I think it's safer to be working with the pure molecule. And I think that there's less cardiac concerns when you're not including things like bufotenine and stuff like that into the mix. So,
Yeah, maybe it's sweating because it gets nervous because you're stroking it, you know?
well,
That's
they're not stroking it, they're squeezing it.
squeezing it, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why it's sweating
They're
and
not gently milking it, they're capturing them, turn them upside down and squeezing them over a piece of glass or something. And then because, there's other people that are getting involved, but because they've got to feed their families or whatever. So I could see why there would be some unethical toad excretion harvesting going on just because of the nature of the country that it's going on in and people's economics as a survival and stuff like that. I've heard of from other practitioners that had gone to the Congress in Mexico City that I believe happens annually, and there's people showing up with medicine that's got blood and stuff in it and what have you. So I just don't think it's ethical, and I think it's far safer to be working with a pure molecule, personally.
yeah, cruelty
Yeah.
to animals.
Yeah.
There are two questions about LSD. I think we have time for them.
Yeah.
Um,
Sure.
Danny is asking if Iboga changed your relationship with LSD or other psychedelics.
Um, Maybe when it's a little closer, like I know that working with Ibogaine and Iboga tends to clean off your receptor sites. So when we're working with 5-MeO, we don't give doses like anything like what I hear other people doing. Very seldom, if we're going to that full release, do we ever have to go above 9 milligrams? People are totally into non-duality. So I don't know if it changed my relationship with LSD. I would like to take LSD more often, but I think the last time I did was about 4 years ago because I'd managed to find the time to do it. Because I'm older now as well, it takes a couple of days to recover from as well. So yeah, it's just like finding the time. But I don't think it changed my relationship with psychedelics per se. I just haven't had the time to really use psychedelics as much as I would like to, just because we've been pretty busy, ever since I started getting into this work. So,
Yeah, I wish he hadn't called it his problem child, LSD.
uh,
because
Yeah.
it has manifested as a problem child. Nobody talks about LSD very much, although it has been influential in so many people's lives in big
Oh
way.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Incredible, incredible. I was supposed to become a farm manager on a dairy farm and stuff, and just like fit in as a cog in the wheel and everything. And then I think it was mushrooms that did it, but then we were taking LSD pretty quickly afterwards after that. And that just set me off on a completely different path of self-discovery in a lot of respects,
Yeah.
so yeah, otherwise I'd have just gone and been a cog in the wheel of things. So yeah, it's you've only got to look at the
Revolution.
early pictures of the Beatles. They're in their black and white suits and everything. Do you know what I mean? And a few years later, you got Sergeant Pepper's.
Yeah.
So we can just see what happened culturally with something like LSD, or even these things. Jobs said that one of the most important thing he did was take LSD. So that really
Exactly.
shouldn't be overlooked. I think it's an amazing, wonderful substance myself personally, and I'd love to take it. It's just finding the right time and the right people to take it with, or not, or on my own. I used to take it on my own quite a bit.
Yeah.
I love that stuff. But
It's amazing. Yeah.
it's an amazing
It didn't
substance.
last so long. It lasts for 12 hours. That's the part I didn't like is how long it lasted. That, you had to
Yeah.
really be in it for a long
I don't
time.
know. We'd often find ourselves going to the fridge at 5 a.m. to do a couple more drops or something, Yeah, it can be long and it can be an arduous journey sometimes. It depends what comes up through it. But yeah, no, I think it's a very important. And it's, how I got out of alcohol use disorder, and
Why?
that's pretty amazing that I knocked it out of the park like that. you know. But I was, as Rocky says, when I took it, I was the most open to receive what it had to show me.
What did it show you that helped you to get rid of alcohol?
A lot of it was my attachment to suffering, because I had this somewhat attachment to suffering as early as I could remember in some ways, which is why that compulsive self-soothing started coming about. And so I would get into the cycle where, life would be really good. And once after about 6 months, you get back on your feet again, is when I'd throw it all away again, you know. And so subconsciously, that was my attachment to suffering. Why would I keep going back to that? You're going to throw your life in the toilet again, just over a depressant, which alcohol is. You know, it is a depressant. So,
So, do you think it was because you hadn't found yourself that you went back to the alcohol or what you wanted to do in the world or like
yeah, yeah. Well, and then again, that just attachment to suffering because it was such a part of my makeup. It was like mine. It's like my precious. You know, it's a complicated thing, but because it was so familiar from such a young age, with the ADHD and everything like that, and then also, that, and I'd also just been clued in that I had ADHD as well, so that answered a lot of questions, and then, you know, so through that, I found a lot of forgiveness, self-forgiveness, and that profound realization that a lot of my returning to alcohol was that attachment to suffering.
mm, yeah,
So I didn't have to live that way any longer. As simple as that. But that's how the penny dropped,
yeah.
which I couldn't get at all in meetings for about 6 years. you know. But I got it all in about 4 hours with LSD. And again, it's that dropping into that deeper part of ourselves and that innate healer that understands the answers. So,
Someone is asking about using LSD after full
mm.
dose or microdose.
Or just in microdosing, I find that microdosing's better than mushrooms tend to couch lock me a bit. I don't want to get off the couch or something, or I just find that LSD is a little bit cleaner and stuff. And then LSD use afterwards. Well, that's up to us, right? that's a very individual thing.
But it can't
But,
hurt. It can't hurt chemically. Chemically, it can't hurt. You still have noribogaine in your body after you
yeah,
finish the
I would let that. I don't encourage people to do much else. Maybe a little bit of microdosing
or
with
cannabis.
mushrooms or something, but it's yeah, and that can be very helpful for some people as well. But I like to leave it 90 days before we're jumping back into other things, just because it can muddy the waters, you know. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's see. Oh, here's Kyra recommending the book LSD and the Mind of the Universe, Diamonds from Heaven.
Mm.
Okay. I think that's it. No one else has any questions. And um, thank you so much, Gareth. What a wonderful
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to, share a little bit about what's been, the path and insights to people getting a treatment and how they should go about that. Okay.
So Gareth is at Inner Realms in Tepoztlan, Mexico. And
Cuernavaca.
Cuernavaca, sorry,
Yeah,
Cuernavaca.
so half an hour away from Tepoztlan. Yeah.
And we're launching our Awake Aftercare program in Tepoztlan, hoping to work with some of the people that come out of Garrett's or Barry at Iboga Quest or other places
Yeah.
in Mexico. So check it out, awakeaftercare.com. And Gareth is at Inner Realms Center. Is that it?
Yep. Yep. Yeah.
And this
Interimcenter.com, all one word. So
is
yeah.
it Center ER Center? Yeah,
Center, yeah, ER, yeah.
not
Yeah,
the
not the
British way.
Canadian way, RRE, but ER. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's more accessible for people. Yeah. So,
Well, thanks again.
okay, yeah, thank you, Lakshmi. And thanks for anybody that's been tuning in to this. So, yeah.
So
Really.
you can find this at awake.net/Ibogaine. That's where all the talks will be for anyone who wants to check it out. We'll put the video up very soon.
Great.